Hello, Janek.
Hi,
Welcome to the show.
thank you. I like to be here.
Yes, and I already had to pause you to say, no, 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 don't tell me, tell the audience. So I'm
I'm
looking
really
forward.
excited. I'm
Yes,
really
me too.
excited.
Me too. Um, and to warm up also the audience to learn about you, when did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
Well, that's a good question because I'm lucky that I got that one in advance because I already know that's the question you start with. So I had some time to think about that. And I think I'm doing the job of a facilitator longer than I call myself a facilitator. And I think I started to actually call myself a facilitator when I became self-employed. And this is like about a year ago. Mm, and it was because I had to distinguish more what kind of role I want to fill and how do I approach a certain topic. And before that, I felt it's more like, okay, I'm kind of a consultant or I'm a trainer and I'm in a workshop room and I give some workshops. And now I feel I have to distinguish if I'm in a role of a moderator, if I'm in a role of a facilitator, or if I'm in a role of a trainer. And that all comes with different responsibilities and different duties, I feel, to fulfill that kind of role. So that's when I started with my self-employment to distinguish between those different roles, and I started to call myself um, uh, also a facilitator.
So, how would it impact your way of preparing a session and communicating with a group if you wear your facilitator hat or your moderator hat or your trainer hat?
Yeah. Well, um, I think it's one of the really important parts about that is if I work alone or if I work within a team and the broader framework. So, for example, for me, a moderator does have the responsibility for the process of the discussion or the reflection or the interview. That's why it's a moderator in the typical sense. Um, but a moderator does not necessarily have the responsibility for the entire program or the concept of the day. Um, so, for example, a facilitator, in my understanding, has more responsibility for the overarching process of this entire workshop day. And it's possible that a facilitator can have a co-moderator who will be helpful in certain sub-sessions, but then there is a certain idea behind that, and the facilitator says, okay, the idea of this session, and this is the result I want to have, and these are the things I need to extract, and we're gonna have 5 groups, and I have 5 co-moderators, and they will all help with that. And I feel as a facilitator, there's still the important difference that the group is responsible for the result in the end.
Mm.
So the group is giving the final the final result. And as a trainer, I feel it's more my responsibility to also give input, to also find good models, to also add new things. And I'm not saying that as a facilitator, I can't give input, but I feel it's not majorly my responsibility. Maybe I get like a speaker or someone else, or I find a nice video, but I don't have to be um,
Subject matter expert.
yeah, I don't
Mm.
need to be the subject matter expert, but if I'm in a trainer position,
You
I
better
should be the
be.
expert.
Yes. And thank you for clarifying that. I think from what I hear and I agree is a moderator is almost detached of the outcome. So it's not about the outcome at all. It's about the conversation
Yeah,
and how to make sure that everyone adds to the conversation and that we have a flow in it and that we touch as many different points. The facilitator is interested in the outcome, but doesn't have responsibility for it. and a trainer is interested in the outcome and has responsibility for it.
Yes, I do think that's a good distinguishment, because I feel it also adds to the growth, and I think it also I don't think there's any one of those roles that that is easier, because I feel each of those parts has different tipping points, and I do feel an expert in each of those different areas can do a way better job than someone who's just like, oh, I'm just gonna wing that on the side.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it really tough in some situations to really know what kind of head am I wearing, and is this part of a training session an open discussion where I go into the role of a moderator and I don't give any input, but now I have to switch my head into the facilitator role, and now I have to switch my head. So I feel that's the actual challenge, if you fill multiple roles, to know when to stop and when to start.
Yeah, yeah. Walking the line.
Yes.
And I would be very curious to hear the link between your background. So you just mentioned before we pressed the record button that you have a background in organizational psychology.
Yes.
And it was Jakob Cromie who told me, you have to talk to Janek and bring him on the show because of his use of board games or board game design, board game methodology, board game mindset. You're going to tell me on in the facilitation practice and organizational development. So I am intrigued.
Well, I really love the idea of board games, and well, I started out with organizational psychology. That's my background. I studied that, and I looked at different models in psychology. And then I looked into the different organizations. And because as a hobby, I really like board games. And I'm a big fan of really complex board games. The more complex they get, if there's a rule book, a literal book, people kind of get scared of that, and I'm like diving into that, and I'm usually the one explaining the rules to an audience.
You're the
And
nerd.
yes, I'm the nerd in the group, kind of. But that kind of teaches you a skill. How do I transfer those complex rules to a group and not make it boring? And if I can transport one entire book of rules to a group and they want to start with a game within half an hour, then I feel I can also transport kind of those models in psychology to a group of leaders, and they kind of want to get going and they want to try it out. So explaining something like a rule set kind of also is good practice to explain psychological models, because I feel psychological models, I really love them. There are some really great ones out there, but they tend not to look really sexy.
Can you give an example?
Well, for example, one of my favorite theories is like DC and Ryan with the self-determination theory, but I feel this is like a really great foundation when it comes to motivation. But what happens is that people take this kind of base and groundwork, and then they added different wordings. They all start with the same letter. All the letters start to spell a word, and then that's kind of fancy, and you can put that model out there, and they call it a new model, but it's kind of just like reworked psychological base work. And then I feel it's kind of sad that those original work sometimes does not get the attention that it deserves, because it's complicated and it's more nuanced than it's easily graspable for other people. So I feel it's good to transfer those kind of topics and to explain them like a rule set in a more intriguing way, so people do not get scared away by that.
So self-determination theory.
Yes, for example. I
Sounds
really like
scary.
that.
What does it mean then in simple words?
Well, this is kind of a good link because I feel it's like one of the most important ideas behind board games, because in self-determination theory, it's a lot about internal motivation and external motivation. So when it comes to board games, it doesn't make a lot of sense to play them if you look at it from a rational point, because when I go to an organization and I tell them, imagine people coming together on a Friday afternoon, sitting together and throwing their brain power on a problem for like 2 hours or more. And in the end, they just put that problem away and store it in a shelf. And then the next week, they come together again voluntarily and take out this exact same problem and throw their brain power on that problem again, and they're actually going to have fun doing that, and then they're not getting any money, but they spend money to buy the next version of that problem and make it more complicated to throw their brain power on. Organizations would be like, that's crazy. Why would people do that? You need to pay them money. They need to, people, if I give them a harder problem, they ask, do I get more money? And I feel that's like the difference between external and internal motivation. If you design work so the work feels more intriguing for the internal motivation, then I don't need to come and try to give people more money, and people won't be like, I play your shitty game only if you pay me that amount of money, and otherwise I won't play it. And this kind of applies to all areas where we have a hobby, and it doesn't need to be board games. Some people don't like board games. I've heard about those kind of people. Apparently they exist. But any kind of hobby you're following is kind of exactly going in that direction, where you voluntarily invest time and most likely money to do work and throw your brain power or your skill in some area. And I do think it's very important to look, how does that work? Why do people do that? And um, why can't we design the workspace and the work environment with some more of those kind of factors that make it easier and more intriguing for people to work there?
Yeah. What comes directly to my mind is Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I know that in sociology, and I guess also in psychology, there's lots of research asking why would people do that? Because they don't even get the personal recognition.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even get the label and the stamp and the badge. And still they spend the brain power, their time on a public good. And yeah, how could organizations use that? So what's your theory? How?
Well, I think if you mentioned Wikipedia, and I feel Wikipedia is kind of a special case, because I feel maybe for the average user, people do not get any recognition. But I feel within certain subgroups there is definitely competition, and there's also recognition. And I feel that kind of shows that wherever there are smaller pockets, people still tend to have this urge to improve things and to apply their knowledge. And I feel people nowadays even more want to share what they know. And it's not important to put a price tag on knowledge. It's more important to add to a better understanding. And if people feel passionate about something, they want other people to know about that topic. And I feel what Wikipedia does, it gets together the people that are the most passionate about a topic and then just lets them share that topic. And so if I transfer that for organizations, I feel I've sometimes organizations try to start their own Wikipedia and their own knowledge base. And it usually goes like that. There's a small group of people that feel very passionate, and they start to write lots and lots of text. and then they get tired, and then other people use that base from time to time, but then it gets outdated. And the important question is, who's going to keep it up to date? And the people that are knowing the best and the people that know the most actual information, they would need to have access to that, and they would have to have the idea and the importance of keeping that information up to date. But then it often is like there are some gateways. Not everyone can just add it in an organization. So you have to apply changes to a certain group who approves those changes or does not approve. And there's already the gate where I feel it's already doomed, because no one is going to go through that many hoops in order to keep something updated. So I feel if you would start an internal Wikipedia, you would actually have to let go. Everyone can edit everything. And you would have to trust your people. Yeah, you would have to trust people to internally moderate that, and not to have a specific group who keeps in check and charge. And I feel that's kind of where trust is an important role, and where I feel I mean, there's this kind of experiment where people change information on Wikipedia to random information, and then how many seconds does it take, or how many days until it gets reworked, and people find that mistake. And I feel organizations that trust their employees would also find out that if someone's making a mistake or writing some goofy stuff in there, other people would correct it, but only if they really use that framework, and if they feel that's my daily tool I come back to and reuse every time. Why would I want my tools to be dirty? Why would I want my tools to be insufficient? So people would start to clean up, and people would start to rework their own tools.
Yeah, and I think it's trust on different levels. It's trust in the individual, that they have the knowledge and that they would share the knowledge to the best of their knowledge, or intention, with best intentions, and trust in the intelligence of the organization as a whole, that if information is not accurate, that someone will jump in and correct it, just like Wikipedia functions, right?
Yeah.
And therefore you need to be as lean and as transparent and possible to change all of that organically, naturally, as you said.
Yeah.
And I wonder, bring it back, because this is already the kind of the line, how do we act, how do we interact with tools and each other in our private life and in organizations. And to come back to your example of the board games, and maybe also Wikipedia, how is it that sometimes we excel in certain roles and we can trust and we can play in board games, or maybe it's a personality type that we're the same people in both scenarios, whether we play a board game or in an organization, because we have those who always want to follow everything by the rule. Whenever there's a question, there are those who say, oh, let's consult the book and see what the rules are. And others, guilty, let's see what works best and we're going to make it up on the way, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And this is a source for conflict, potentially.
It is.
And then there are those who are very competitive and like, I want to win. And others like, no, we're here to play. Don't take it so seriously. Another source for conflict.
Yes. So I feel sometimes people say, I don't like board games. And I'm always saying, well, you didn't play the right board game with the right group. But I'm certain I can find the perfect board game for everyone. And it's more, you know, when people say, I don't like to play board games, and I ask them, well, why don't you? They're like, well, my parents made me play Monopoly. And I had to play Risk against my older siblings, and I always got my butt kicked. And now I don't want to play
trauma, childhood trauma.
Yes, yes. And I feel, well, you didn't play a good board game then. You didn't play your type of board game with your type of crowd. And the same is true, I feel, as you mentioned, within organizations. If you are in an organization that is playing hardball and that's playing cutthroat, we don't make prisoners, doesn't matter, money first. And you're one of those kind of dreamy, hey, let's do something good for the world. Well, it's not your working environment. You're going to be really upset there.
It's a wrong board game and the wrong crowd.
It's the wrong board game with the wrong crowd. But if you, for example, for me, board games, it's more like a small simulation. It's a certain set of rules that simulate certain certain interactions, and that allow for certain interactions, and that don't allow for certain interactions. And that's the way they create an experience. I really like the explanation I heard somewhere else. It's not my idea, but I really like it. It's like you get a script for a theater play, but just because you have the script, it doesn't mean it's always the same show. And if you have a certain cast, you can play Shakespeare in a really funny, fancy way. But if you have a different cast, it gets really serious. And the same is true with board games. I can have the same set of rules, and I can play the same board game with one group, and it's going to be a jolly round. It's going to be lots of laughter. People are going to stand up, drink, and chat. And in a different group, the exact same game is going to be silent, thinking, and cutthroat manner, and then they're totally different outcomes. And I feel this is one thing where I feel that's also important for facilitation in workshops. It's what kind of expectations do I have? And if you are sitting in a workshop environment and you start to lay out the rules or whatever, and you have some people in there that want to have a jolly workshop and have like fun time and experience new ideas, and you have a couple of people and they're like, okay, and now we're going into cutthroat mode, it doesn't work. So I feel it's really important to start with the expectation, for example, in certain workshops. And yeah,
what came to my mind was immediately the question that I usually ask related to workshops, and I want to ask it related to board game. What makes a board game night fail?
What makes a board game night fail probably is the same thing that makes workshops fail. So one thing I feel that makes it fail is if you have a great divergence of expectations. If some people are coming to that night and they feel, I finally can wrestle someone with my mind power, and we're going to have a really hard standoff, and we're going to fight hard, and that's fine. And then afterwards we can shake hands and it's going to be a good evening. I had those kind of rounds, and it's great fun, but you have to have this certain mindset with it, and you have to expect people to like take 10 minutes to think about their next move, and you have to think that people will, on the finish line, use the most backstabbing cutthroat move just to get in front, and afterwards you congratulate, and it's fine, it was a fair fight, and they used everything within the rules they could to make win. And there are other rounds when I feel it's so much more important to look at, does everybody feel involved? Is everybody having fun? Is that a nice evening for everyone? And I think that's one of the most important parts, to know what kind of evening, what kind of experience do I want to create if I'm the host of a workshop / board game. And the other thing I feel that are what makes workshops fail is more on this level, how will people remember that workshop? Because I feel often workshops that feel very jolly and everybody had fun sometimes lack impact. And it's like, yeah, it was nice, but we're not following up on that. It doesn't change anything. So I feel it's a question, how will people remember that game night? How will people remember that workshop? And did it actually have an impact on their daily work? Not the board game, but obviously the workshop. Is there something they experience after that now I'm coming back to DC and Ryan, that they feel I also had an impact. There is something. I influenced.
Yeah, which makes me again curious, because I think the impact somehow often happens through conflict. So working through the parts that are not easy, because then it solves an issue or it solves a knot. And I wonder whether the way to have the impact, and I wonder whether I'm thinking out loud. So I was thinking about the board games that boards play. So what makes a board game fail is the different expectations, as you described. For a board game night, it's easy-ish. You think of the crowd you invite, and you make sure that we all have the same expectations. Okay, is this all about kumbaya and a jolly time, or is it about showing who's the best player in the game, in the room? Whereas a board meeting, you do have the different players, they're set. You might have rules of the board game, but you still have different expectations or different personalities and how they join the game.
Yes. Yes. So I feel there are certain, and now it's more like these are not the only things that make board games fail. You know, there's way more that can make a board game a bad or a good board game. And I feel one of those factors is um, how tightly narrowed people will enjoy that. Like how small is the slice of crowd that will enjoy that. And there are some board games that are really specific, and if you find the right match and you find the right people, it's fantastic, but they need to be really specific and in that area. And there are other board games that are more broad, and people find their spot within the game, and you can play it a little more competitive, you can play it a little more jolly. It doesn't, it's more flexible. And I feel if the crowd is set, I have to decide for a game if I'm providing the game, or I have to decide for a workshop environment where I feel everybody has a place where they can play into their competences, where they can place their knowledge, where they can place their expectations, where they can provide something for the outcome. And I need to give a room where people can express their feeling and the jolly side, and I have some fun elements in there. And I also need to have a certain space where people that feel more like we need to get things done and move along can place bullet points, and they have the feeling of accomplishment. And so I feel the flexibility is important in that matter as well. Yeah. And I feel, for example, that that board games often have three different layers that I look in board games, but I also feel when I look at gamification or gamified elements in workshops, I look at three different elements. So you could say layers or levels, depending how gamey you want to phrase it, but I feel the first one is the topping. It's like the surface. It's kind of the idea, what kind of interface do I use? It's the visual and the tactical feeling of your material in a workshop. So for example, I could give you a questionnaire with like 20 questions and you have to answer them, and it kind of feels boring and it kind of feels like I'm getting tested. So people do not really like that. Imagine a workshop or a training and I have like, okay, now we had this model and here are 20 questions, answer them and I will correct them and I will see if you actually understood what I want. People will be like, oh my God, back to school, terrible. But if I go like, okay, let's have a quiz show about this, and we have like two groups and people can answer different questions, different degree of, trickiness, and they get points for that, and then they can challenge each other. People get like, oh, that's a fun game, let's play that. But in the end, I'm still asking questions and I want answers for them. So all I changed was the surface. All I changed was how do people interact with that. And if I have an intriguing surface, if I have an intriguing kind of a way to interact with the topic, people tend to keep their attention longer. But in the end, I cannot forget I didn't change anything about the content. So sometimes I feel organizations think, oh, we reworked our environment, and now people get points if they sell something, they get points, and if they have enough points, then a bell rings and it's shiny. Or when it comes to like soccer, it's like the World Series of soccer, and we have teams, and they go against each other, and then we play that, and it's gamification. I feel like, no, it's not. Well, yeah, you changed the surface, but you're still using the same mechanisms behind that. You're still using the same competition mechanisms with the same advantages and disadvantages.
And that's a very interesting point. And it reminds me of a conversation I had with Lily Higgins, I think, on gamification. And to what extent or where does it start to become manipulative? Because I'm thinking of the beginning of our conversation. We're like, okay, how come that in certain situations in our private life, we would sit down and solve a problem, even pay money for it, and it's fun. And in the organizational context, we want money for solving problems.
Yeah.
So our organizations could use these gamifications, these toppings, shiny objects, to, one might call it, manipulate their employees so that they ask for less money to solve the problem.
Yes.
What is
I feel that's true, because right now we're still like on the first level, and I feel that's like the surface, because I kind of feel, okay, you're just scratching the surface. But people, as I said, they tend to take longer, but they will see through that. If you have a bad game, it doesn't matter that it's really shiny and that it's really nice. People will play it just 1, 2, 3 times, and then they leave it. And then it doesn't matter how shiny or expensive or fancy the game looks. If it doesn't hold up, people will look through that. And I feel the same is true here. And that's why this kind of I think kind of bad gamification always needs to be reworked. Is people start to be like, oh, now we see some results, people are interacting more with that, but now they stop interacting. We need to rework it into a more shiny surface because last time it worked. So we need to add more bells. We need to add more points and badges and stuff. And then it keeps working again, and people get really easy looking through those kind of systems, because we're actually training them, because this is like the 5th iteration. We present them with some kinds of point system, which I feel is really bad implementation of the idea of gamification. I feel good gamification does not use and doesn't need any points. And yeah, so I feel this is like, people look through that, and sometimes they need longer, sometimes they're quicker with that, but it doesn't hold up very long.
Thank you. This makes total sense, which also brings us back to the Wikipedia example and the trust in the people and intelligence of an organization. Great. So you said there are 3 layers.
Yeah.
So number 1.
Yeah.
I interrupted you.
No, don't. That's totally fine. That's totally fine. Yeah, you're right. The second layer I feel that is important to look at is the area of mechanics. So what kind of mechanics and rules do I build into, for example, when I design a workshop unit, or when I design something like a serious game or something? And this is the part I feel that is often used, for example, if you play like the ballpoint game, or if you play like Scrum with Lego or something like that. You try to simulate the rules that are in the real world, and you try to reduce them so you can kind of play it in a more fast forward way. And so you give certain rule sets, and people get this kind of mini game, and then they can try and error, and they can test different strategies, but in the end there's one perfect strategy. So there is one way to approach that game. So for example, if you play the pizza game or something that tries to show you how does a bottleneck work, you realize, I need to change my work in progress level, and then I will be better at this game. I will get more points.
What is the pizza game?
Oh, this is one of those workshop games, and it's basically people are in different groups, and each group has to make a certain part of a pizza. So one group is making the dough, and they just like cut out a circle, and the next group has to, make some toppings, and the next one has some cheese, and then there's one step where they have to put it in the oven, and in the end, the question is how many pizzas did we get, and depending how you set up the rules, there are some steps that take longer and some steps that are more quicker. But in the end, it doesn't matter if I have like 5 more pizza doughs ready to go if I don't have any topping I can put on them. And then you realize it doesn't matter if I improve pizza dough making and I have like 20. Well, there's still 20 unused pizza doughs. I need to improve a different point in the chain. And I'm sure other people will explain that game way better. And it's just why I want to point out, if you want to reduce certain mechanics, there is often still the idea there is a right or a wrong approach to that. You can fail at this game, you can have less or more points, you can win kind of this game. And I do feel there's an advantage here, because it's way easier to explain something in a game and let people experience that within an hour, what otherwise in the real world would take like half a year. And then I often can't afford to let people fail half a year in the real world and be like, oh, now you learned your lesson. Isn't that great? So that's kind of a great advantage. The disadvantage, however, if I only focus on the mechanism, is you always have some smart people within the group that find the loopholes. And sometimes if you do not set up the rules really, really well, then people find loopholes where they can cheat. And then people learn, oh, if I bend the rules in the right way and I find a different approach, then I can win on this simulation. But the same way of cheating often does not apply in the real world. You can't copy the same behavior, and then it kind of falls apart. So it's always a kind of a balance you have to get. If I focus on mechanics, I kind of want to let you experience something. I want to let you experience how it feels to fit within certain rules and how you can use them to your advantage, and how does it feel if you try out different roles. Which brings me back to what you said, that sometimes people try to be, how does it feel to be in the role of looking into the rules every time, and sometimes how does it feel to be like, okay, it's just a game, let's just try it. And then they feel, oh, that actually worked really well. Maybe in real life I should let go more often as well. So the mechanic side of games needs to be designed really well. And that's why I feel it's really important to think about it quite a lot. And that's why I feel some serious games have a great advantage on the market, and why they are on the market for such a long time, because they found a way to have a really intriguing set of rules that interact really well, and you cannot cheat easily, and you need the group in a certain mindset and prepare them for that so they actually learn something. And that kind of brings me to the third layer that I feel is the most intriguing one, but it's also kind of the hardest. And this is also the layer why I feel it's important to be with a group as they go through that process. And this is the layer of like self-reflection. And this is the layer where I feel it doesn't matter if you win or lose. It doesn't matter. There is no right or wrong. It's just the idea that I give you a certain room you can experience, and the question is, how did you use that room? So for example, if there's a possibility in a game, you can build your own town, but you can also win by destroying the town other people are building. You know, some people have the tendency to be like, well, if I can win either way, maybe sometimes it's more important, or I would have the greater advantage by destroying someone else's building. Sometimes, I have the advantage by taking the card that would give you most points. I'm not getting any points, but you're not getting them either. So maybe I win by that. But other times, people tend to be like, oh, I take the card that's giving me most advantage, even though I give you a card that gives you even more advantage. So it's more the idea to reflect on that. What makes you choose that behavior? How does it feel? And how would you use that space within the game framework? And what would happen if you show the same behavior in a work environment? And this is kind of why I like to use games in workshop setups, especially with leaders, because usually when I show a psychological model and I'd be like, look at that model, that's really, like, smart people worked a lot on this, many years of research. People have this tendency to be like, yeah, we kind of know that. It's kind of this already known before effect, psychology wise. Yeah, I kind of had the feeling that sounds plausible. We already do that. But I feel if I let them experience it first within a game, and then I'm like, what happened here? And then I show the model and be like, hey, this is kind of a model you experienced just like a minute ago. Then they have a much better understanding, much deeper understanding and connection. And I started out by going with the theory first, and then going with like, experience that theory now. And now I changed it. I go with experience first and then reflect on that. And then in the end, there's the reveal of, hey, maybe this model fits your experience as well.
Which makes total sense to me, as I understand it. Also because you can extend this, the rules of a game or the mindset of playing a game, and thereby look at how you translate the same behavior, a different behavior in the real world, and laugh about it because you kind of felt caught, ertappt in German. And like, oops, am I really doing the same as I did in the game? Am I really doing this in the real world? And then you have something to talk about, but from a more light point of view, instead of, okay, this is a theory, let's analyze your behavior. And then it's back to this teacher mode that you explained when distributing questions to test whether they paid attention.
And this is really interesting because in the context is really important. In psychology, there is this theory. I'm sure other people will explain it in more detail and easily, but there's this idea we have a certain personality, or we have a tendency to behave in a certain way once we are confronted with a certain situation. But how does it happen that we do not behave the same way every day? Because our personality does change within our lifetime, but it doesn't change so dramatically Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but still I'm behaving different. So it's obviously not just our personality that kind of has an influence on our behavior, but it's also the context of the situation I'm in. So if I'm in a situation that has a really high setup of information I get from the context, I know what is expected from me to do, the influence my personality has on my behavior is reduced. So one example for that I kind of feel makes this really clear is if you go into a restaurant, it doesn't matter how extroverted or introverted you are, you're going to sit on your own table. You're not joining a different table of random people and sit there and be like, oh, that's really nice. I'm going to have a sit. Yeah, let me taste from your food. Oh, that's really good. And then I go into the kitchen and I be like, oh, can I help? Can I take a look? No, there's certain unwritten and sometimes written rules, and I know what's expected. I'm going to sit down on my own and I'm going to order, and I know I'm going to pay afterwards. This is kind of the contract. And the same is true in organization. So for example, when in some training sessions, people use role play in not like role play Dungeons and Dragons style, but really we're sitting across each other and now you are the leader and you are the employee and give some feedback. And people know what is expected from my role. So you see not how would they actually behave, but you rather see what do they think they should do in that kind of role. So they start and be like, okay, I'm going to have this discussion with them, and then he's going to be really upset about that feedback, and I have to be nice to them, and in the end, I'm going to make a summary, and this is okay. But that does not show me the behavior you're going to show me on a Friday at like 4 p.m. and you're like really stressed out and someone's walking in your office. I don't know how will you behave then when no one is looking and you're really with the back on the wall. So what I need to do in order to get people more in contact with their side is I reduce the context. So I make the context more ambivalent, and I'm trying to give some context where it's not so clear what's the right decision. So, for example, if I set up a game, I make it in such a way that you would win easily if you destroy someone else's town, but that person is really upset. So now I'm kind of in a situation where I feel like, well, is winning more important? Do I provide more points to my team, or is it more important that I'm playing nice with everyone? Is it expected from me as a leader to show some strength now and be like, I can do that, or is it expected that I show a more compelling side and a more team-oriented side? And there are arguments for both sides. And in the end, if I have this perfect state of there is no wrong answer, your impulse matters most. And some people have the impulse to be like, well, in the end, we need to win. And some people have the impulse to be like, well, even if we lose, our team will be happy. And then I'm not saying, oh, you made the wrong decision, but I can go like, if you follow the same impulse in an ambivalent situation in your work environment, what might be the consequences? And then people have this experience and they have this idea, how would they behave on a Friday afternoon if no one is looking? And if it's not this kind of the context already expecting that. And I feel that is kind of the area where people experience and get into a different experience in a different mode, and they can really anchor those topics different and approach certain topics in the work environment different because I feel our work environment got way more ambivalent than it used to be.
Especially since working from home.
Yes.
We're in constant ambivalence, being in our private environment where we sometimes have to be role models to our kids and spouses as at the same time as colleagues, leaders,
Yes.
Servants.
And it's totally fine to approach different roles in your life with a different mindset, like the same way I would approach if I go to a certain play round. I know this is the crowd I have to be in this role, and this is a different crowd, and I'm going to be in the jolly round. And maybe if I am the jolly player within the family, I feel and I'm going to play hardball on work, or maybe the other way around. So you don't have to be the same player in each group. And I'm not saying each player is the same, but I feel it's important to reflect on that. And I feel it's important that sometimes, and that's why I feel in organization it's important to reflect that, is sometimes I feel, especially leaders that are in the position to change the rules of the game they're playing, they feel they have to play a certain game and they feel I have to play in a certain way because it's expected from me. And then it's interesting to flip that concept and be like, if you can design the game however you want, you don't have to design a boring game. You don't have to design a game people only play for money. You can design a really fun game, and you attract a certain crowd by the design. So if I'm in a company and I design the game in a certain hardball play game, I'm only going to get people within that company. Only people will stay that feel comfortable playing that game, or that feel I can tolerate that. And everybody else will leave that place.
And you caught my curiosity now. Where do you think is this inertia coming from? Because in my mind, I have two scenarios. One is an organization promotes a certain behavior and thereby maintains a certain behavior. So if a manager moves through the organization up to the leadership because he or she gets rewarded for very strong mean behavior of winning only, not collaborating. And then, of course, you have in the leadership those who could change the rules of the game are of a certain type. So they decided. The other scenario would be that if I am, maybe they are not aware that they can actually change the rules, as you said, because I think many of us in our everyday life, we somehow forget that we can change the rules. We don't have to play the boring life game.
Yes.
Right?
Well, so it's the same reason people still play Monopoly even though they don't want to, and they think these are all the board games that exist.
Exactly. Just because we played it with our parents doesn't mean that we have to play it with our children, and that they have to suffer as much as we do.
Yes.
Or is it maybe also, that would be the third scenario that comes up in my mind, that these leaders don't dare to change. Who am I? So, because this means being bold, taking risks, and what would the others say?
Yeah. I feel one thing is, imagine you played a game and you went with a certain strategy and you won really big time. And the next time you play the same strategy and you win again. What makes you change your strategy? So if a leader goes up in a company behaving in a certain way, they are playing that company within a certain, they play a certain strategy within that company, and they obviously are successful. Otherwise they wouldn't be where they are. So this kind of encourages to be like, oh, I imagine my way of doing it is the only way to do it. And that's kind of, this is kind of like coaches that are like, I was really successful going with this and that, and now I teach that to other people because I feel this is the way to do it. And I think it's the same way if I used to have, if you go, like, for example, for me, it was the same with, like, again, board games, obviously, but I used to play within a certain crowd and I had a good time there. And then it was by accident that I joined a different crowd. And I realized there is a whole different area of games I never experienced before that is really fun. And just by accident, I stumbled into that idea it can be different. So I feel if you want to change that, there needs to be the idea it can be different as well. So I don't know, maybe you should have the possibility for leaders to go and experience different companies and different ways to lead, and then they realize, oh, there is a different way to approach that. And as you've mentioned before, the difference between games and our organization is there's more on the line. If you lose a game, you lost a game. That's like, for some people, it's easier to swallow than others. Some people flip the table, but in the end, it's a game. That's fine. You lost it. But if it's within the company, are you willing to take that risk? How much are you willing to take that risk? Are you willing to lose your job for that? And I feel I don't want to judge people for not doing that. I don't want to judge people for being, well, I don't feel brave or determined enough to put my career on the line here. Nevertheless, I feel it's more, if I'm within a company
No,
with different behaviors.
you just froze. You froze at the point when I'm within a company.
When I'm within a company, I feel it's important that the leaders, if
Gordon, cut that out.
so in a company, I feel if I want the leaders to experiment with different behaviors and different mindsets, I need to give them the experience that it's fine, that I need to reduce the risk. And
It's
this is
safe.
more like in the area of psychological safety. It's fine. You can try a different behavior and you won't be judged for that. You won't have that much on the line. And if I put less on the line, people tend to experiment more. You know, if you play poker, but you play them with bottle caps, it's different than when you play with your house. People tend to be less stressed when they play with bottle caps, and then they sometimes, you know, it's a different behavior. And I feel if I want to have more experimentation within a company, I need to reduce the risk of taking
Yeah,
those kind of roads.
yeah, and maybe also to learn to make this transfer. Sorry, to learn to make this transfer between how do we behave in our private context as opposed to the organizational context, because I think there are many things, as you also described, that we do intuitively in our private lives.
Yes.
And then somehow we step into the office and we forget about that.
Yes, that's exactly the part where I felt role play games like Dungeons and Dragons have a lot of ideas and have a lot in common with facilitation, but people don't see that very easily. But I stumbled upon that when I know some people that are going within those kind of story-driven games where they tell lots of stories and people join for like 8-hour sessions a night, and then you tell those people, well, you have a workshop tomorrow, and they're like, oh, I never learned that. I don't know what to do, and I feel like that's crazy. You know, you're facilitating entire nights. With intriguing gameplay, and then you don't feel the competence to do the same thing with something at work. And I feel, for example, what can people learn from those role-playing games, or what can they take for facilitation? It starts with storytelling. It starts with the idea, how do I tell a story? Why is it so useful to have a story arc within your workshop or within your adventure? Because if you just have random bits and pieces here and there, people would get really confused. Then why do I have random bits and pieces in my workshop? So I need to connect those pieces, make a line so people know, oh, we start here, now we go there, and this is the next step, and then follows that. Another one I feel you would never do within such a role play game, but people still tend to do that within workshops, is, for example, the idea of diversity. So if you go and build your adventure, you know, your fellowship, you would not start with like 9 dwarfs going on a journey. You would have like the wizard and the dwarf and, you know, like all different sets, because they all have different skills, abilities, but they also have different setbacks. And they kind of, if you have a really diverse group, you get like lots of input, and you can take many challenges that are coming ahead. Sometimes you need the wizard, sometimes you need, like, you know, the muscle or whatever. And the same is true for like workshops. If I'm in a workshop and I know there are different topics, different problems we need to tackle, then it's not the best idea just to have like 10 people in the same position. They all tend to tackle this one problem really, really well, and then they're gonna stumble into a problem where it needs a different skill, it needs a different mindset, it needs a different perspective. So I feel it's the idea of adding diversity to a group that's also good. And I could go on. For example, I feel when it comes to challenging a group, if it's within a training or within a workshop, I often feel there is kind of I don't know, maybe sometimes I don't know if people are afraid or they don't want to do that, but challenging a group kind of has this bad feeling. It has this feeling of no, don't push them too much, and you need to wait for the weakest link, and everyone needs to get within the finishing line. And I feel no, it's fine. You can give them a really hard challenge, and people like hard challenges. If things are too easy, people stop using that. If a game gets too easy, you know,
Bored.
people don't play that anymore. For example, you see that if you play with small children games, they are really excited. And you're sitting there and you're like, oh my, this is so boring. If it's round 2 and you can already make out how the game will end, but you still have to sit through another 15 rounds of calling colors and numbers, and you're like, oh my goodness, that's like really hard. And I feel it's the same within a workshop. So giving a good challenge and having a good range of challenges to also get the people that are like further ahead on that topic, or that have a different set of skills, is really important. And I would always recommend to I'm thinking. Was ist das Gegenteil von underestimate?
Overestimate.
Yeah. Okay. So I would always recommend overestimating the potential power of the group, because I feel underestimating is fatal. If you underestimate the power of the group and you under challenge them, it's instant death. It's boring and people step out. If you over challenge them, not too much, but enough that they have the feeling I could reach it if I actually put some effort into it.
Yeah.
That's the sweet spot.
True, because otherwise it's frustrating, and then you lose them to the same extent as if it's too easy.
Yeah. But I have this idea that usually I feel if you look at the crowd, people have this tendency, and it's also within leaders, they have the tendency to be like, yeah, they need more information, they can't do that, and people are
trusting. Trust in the organizational intelligence. Yeah.
Yes, and I feel more trust is fine. So whenever you feel like, oh, I think they could handle that, put another dash on that and be like, maybe they can also handle that. And then I can still roll back. I can still go like, hey, if it's fine, if you have problems going this level, you can have a cheat sheet, or here are some examples, or you can take a look at this and you will get your first clue, or you will get your first example. And then people will take the decision, do I need that or do I not use that? And
it's easier to level it down, to give them some additional hints, than to make it on the spot more complex and more interesting.
Yes.
And I think it's easier also to handle with frustration, because it's too complicated, because that's constructive energy somehow. Whereas to infuse energy when a group is bored,
yes, it's really tough.
Then you have to give a lot. Otherwise, you can take this kind of frustrated energy and we channel it, but the energy is there. If a group is bored, you have to infuse energy, and that's hard work.
And that's also a mechanism that is found in board games. So for example, if you look at those exit games that are like kind of, this kind of escape room games you can play within your group at home, they have some clue cards. So they do not add like, okay, this is a really easy one, but you can make it more complicated if you read this card. But they say, okay, this is the difficulty, but if it's too tough, here are some clue cards that make it easier so you can adjust the level to your liking.
Yeah.
And so in order for people to not be frustrated with those clue cards, you kind of have to make it okay to use them. So don't be like, oh, and the real losers, they also use a clue card, but you have to be like, hey, it's totally fine to use that clue card. But this is, for example, one thing I feel you can really use in workshops to have like a tough challenge, but then add some mechanisms that can make it more approachable. Add examples, give like a head start, you know, this kind of things, but do not add them right away, but let the people decide if they want that clue card or not. And then they can adjust that the difficulty for themselves.
Makes total sense. I would bite my ass if I didn't invite you to share a bit more about your the method that you're developing, because I remember that you wanted to tell me everything about it during our exploration call, and I cut you off and said, "No, don't tell me. Don't tell me now. Tell me later."
Yeah, well, this is really that's a good part because I still have so much on my worksheet here. So, yeah, the method I developed also derived from one thing I recognized when I was looking at board games and what do they do really well. And this is from one of the concepts that are kind of typically within the board playing community, where people have this idea of downtime within a game. So downtime is the time you are not engaging with the topic, and so for example, these are those kind of games where you make your move and then there are like 5 other people, but you know you can't plan ahead because the board is going to change a lot. And you have this feeling it takes forever because they're like another action, another card. I draw another action and I do another card. And you feel like, okay, I can go into the kitchen. I can make myself supper. I can have a short nap and then I come back and there are still 2 people ahead of me. So these are games people lose interest in. And good games kind of make it so the downtime is really short, and every step within all the different moves, all the people move together, or everybody can contribute, or you can have an impact on the state of the board. And on the same time, I feel board games, actually the boards of the board game have this tendency to make it very clear. They have to make it very clear what is the current state, what where are the resources, how many resources are left, what players are invested in what area of those resources. And I have to make a decision quickly. If you imagine a board game is just written in an Excel sheet, it would be terrible. Imagine how many lines would I need to read in order to understand what that game looks like. But that's kind of the way we approach projects within companies with Excel sheets. And we have like, and these are all the different topics and to-dos and steps and whatever's. And these are all the stakeholders. And people have to keep all that information in their head in order to kind of see through that. What are the interactions between that? So I felt, or the idea was to represent projects in a three-dimensional way and to have like certain different channels of perception in order to have more different facets in the same model at the same time. So that sounds kind of complicated, but what I mean by that is, for example, with this mythology, I use, for example, the space, the space, how close those islands are standing next to each other, how closely are those topics related. Each island represents one. Yes.
maybe I can rephrase to see whether I understood it correctly. So the first bit is, why do we think in projects in terms of Excel sheets if when we visualize them as a board game where we think about strategy, very complex strategies, and we engage with them and we're having fun and we're putting all our brain power in. So you would then basically translate a project challenge into a board game challenge where you see, okay, how does it have to look like visually? What is the map? What is the landscape we're operating in?
Yes.
What are the resources we can access? Who are the players?
Yes.
And what are the rules?
Yes. And this is kind of, if you engage the project like that, there are way more possibilities because it's so much easier to, for example, move certain pieces somewhere else and be like, how does that feel if we move that over here? Oh, now we need, yeah, that's good because now certain stakeholders are standing next to each other, or we need to move certain priorities, or we can adjust our strategy. And it's easier because if I use different, for example, I use height for priority, or I use different figures with different colors and forms for different stakeholders, it's easier to switch between those dimensions. It's kind of, you remember those glasses you used to have, where like one side is green and one is red, and then you look at certain things, and if you just look with one side, you see one image, and with the other, you see a different image. And it's kind of the same, that you can focus what kind of topics are standing close to each other, but also where is the height. But you can also look at, okay, and where are the stakeholders interested, but what's about the priority, and so on and so on.
And what I hear, and I'm not sure whether you're saying that, but what I hear is also a layer of almost constellation. So if we are putting stakeholders in this kind of proximity to each other, or if we're using this representation of a stakeholder, how does it feel, and what does the system, how does the system react to it? So you can actually bring the entire kind of constellation theory into the board game as well as a next layer.
Yes, so it's kind of like in addition to a constellation theory where you like put it on a plane, I also have like it's kind of a mixture of mind mapping certain areas and topics in like 2-dimension, and then you add a 3rd dimension with priorities, and then you add the constellation theory of where do certain stakeholders relate to each other. And because each of those different areas uses a different layer, a different channel of perception, you can add them all together. Because if I would use for each of those steps the same layer, adding in an Excel sheet, oh, and this is the stakeholder, and this is that step, and this is the topic next to it, it would just overload, and we cannot really make a quick decision. But if I use that in a 3-dimensional model, it's really easy to experiment with that. It's easy to shift and change and discuss and realize when are certain difficult situations approaching. Yeah, it looks really nice if we shift this over here, but then all our stakeholders will be lost. Is that really what we want? And also working with this framework really, I feel, goes into that what I mentioned before with the 3 different layers. If you work it out well, you have all 3 layers. So you have like a nice visual, and you can work it because the visual is really easily perceived and you get the information. The mechanics I use for building that project world lets everybody interact, lets everybody add their idea into that. And then you can also, and I'm not saying this is a correct map, or this is the right or wrong, or this is the correct strategy or the wrong strategy, but it's more like, okay, let's assume this is the way it is. Do you want to be it like that in the future? How would you react to that? What needs to change, and what are the steps you need to take in order to change this map for your
also
liking?
Because it makes things very explicit so that you can actually agree or disagree on something because
Yeah.
it's literally in your face.
Not just
What?
that, because I feel if you use physical objects, that's also one thing I realized while working with that. If you use physical objects, you can't discuss physics away. Usually,
Mhm.
if you just have like lots of cards somewhere, it's like, yeah, and this area is important to us. We all agree. Yeah, we kind of agree. But if you take a physical object and you have to put it on the table for a certain topic, it's not like, yeah, I meant the one next to it. No, you didn't. You put it right there, and there's a reason for it. And please give the idea, why did you put it here? You made this decision.
Mm.
So I feel in the end, it helps so people can express their opinion if you facilitate it in such a way that everybody has the same saying, so everybody can contribute and actually say their opinion, and it's not filtered by, oh, I say the same thing
Yeah.
like my boss said, or I feel there's like a political side to it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and by having this physical representation in the end, you can also discuss it really tough and be like, no, I do not want that. Or what needs to happen in order to make this look different?
Yes. Also, the entire topic of prioritization, that if you see all these objects in this little space with that many resources, is this really what you can do? And I'm in a funny state of being right now because on the one hand, I can see the relevance and what could be possible.
Mhm.
Imagine a world of project managers who are a mix of visual thinkers and board game designers and facilitators. And at the same time, it makes me really sad
Oh,
because I realize that what really has to change is an entire, almost maybe I'm getting too philosophical here, but an entire educational system where we have to stop thinking about projects and Excel sheets, but start teaching children and young adults to map out their ideas and their projects visually.
yeah.
And it's something that we could learn, but we don't.
Hmm. I feel we are actually teaching that, but not in the same context. We are teaching people to play board games. We are teaching them to map out their ideas and tactics. That's why I say it's in a different context, but people learn that. If you teach them bad projects like Monopoly, they will not continue doing that. But I feel if you start experiencing more games and if you try out different games, you will find really fun games and people have a lot of fun. And then um, it makes it easier to transfer that to other contexts as well. Because that's actually the same way I did it. I had really fun in one context, and then I just asked, well, why not have the same the same um, advantages in a different context as well.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah, and there's so much more because I feel board games often anticipate challenges of the future before organizations do. Because board games have this really high challenge that because they are fighting for our attention, because they are like the hardest organizations out there because they are nonprofit. You have to pay money for a board game and then solve a riddle.
You
And
mean the board game industry? So
yes,
okay,
yes.
okay, yeah,
So I feel if a game makes it in the board game industry, it has to be really, really well done. So this is kind of like the idea I feel. If you look at a board game, you kind of have lots and lots of iterations that is worth looking at. So because we've been talking about it, I feel cooperative board games are kind of on the rise. It's not like they're new by far, but they get more and more attention. And there's also a development within cooperative board games, I feel that kind of represents a development we see in the real world. So when cooperative board games are started, there is this thing that's in the board game community called an alpha player syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like one player
Mm-hmm.
who takes the charge, and it's often like with like best intention, like the person who read the rules, the person who's explaining the game. I'm not saying I'm not guilty of, you know, having firsthand experience, but you get this tendency to get over invested in the game. And now you are in some way, you have the deepest knowledge of the mechanics of the game because you're explaining them to everybody else. And now people start to take their turns. And obviously you want to correct them. And obviously you're like, oh no, there's a different move that's way better for you.
You become the micromanager.
And you become the micromanager. And this is the alpha player syndrome refers to the player who starts to take the turns for everybody else and who
the founder who hires the next set of managers who, no, I tell you how it is because I invented it and I know how it works best.
Yes, and this is the exact same mechanic. So what happens when people play with an alpha player is they get bored. And they're like, yeah, well, you know, I'm going to the kitchen. You're like, yeah, but it's your turn. Yeah, whatever. You're going to set my pieces anyway. I don't need to be here and watch you play me. You know, it's like if people cannot give input, then they disengage and then they leave the game and maybe play something else. You know, and then there's like the last player standing who's moving all the pieces. It's like, why is nobody helping me? I have so much workload. I need to play for everybody, and everybody's saying, like, well, you know,
we're having a beer in the kitchen if you want to join us.
Yeah, you know, and this is kind of the way. And board games kind of tackled that topic, and they were like, okay, how do we need to design the game in order to avoid that? And there are like some mechanics that board games implemented to avoid an alpha player to arise within a group. And like two things that just quickly come to my mind is one is a reduction of information for everyone. So for example, just the basic mechanic of hidden cards that only you can see your cards and not everybody has all the information means that I cannot make the decision for everyone. I have to ask you, you can make your decision. And if you don't tell me what's your card, then, you know, that avoids micromanagement. So by having not all the information, I cannot engage within that alpha player mode. And the next step, actually there are like three, maybe there are going to be more, but another one, another mechanic is if you change the abilities each player has. So maybe one player has the ability to use a certain action or engage with the board state in a certain way. So that player has to make a certain call or decision that I cannot influence. And it's the same within a company. If you have like an expert, I don't know how to do this kind of stuff. You're the expert. You need to tell me.
Roles.
Yes.
Yeah.
And another one is, for example, time restriction. So if you have a game where you only have you have 30 seconds to make a decision, I can't discuss everything with everybody. And there are certain games that actually are time-based and they're played in real time. And you have to be really quick and all over the place. And I do not have the time to micromanage everyone. I need to have the trust in the people that they will make good decisions and they will ask for help when they need it. And all those three things are things I feel, especially micromanagers, feel threatened in the real life, but that are happening right now. People and things need to be delivered in a timely manner, and there's time pressure. I'm not the expert anymore, and other people within my team are more knowledgeable of the product I'm producing than I am, and I don't have all the information. You know, there's some information hidden. It gets too complex. I did not read every book on this topic. And all those threats happen to be implemented in a board game in order to make a good cooperative experience. And the good thing is our working environment is implementing all those things right now. And what we call like a VUCA world is nothing else but the world being like, hey, let's have a good board game. But all the alpha players are feeling threatened and be like, that's a terrible game. I can't use the strategy I used to do all the time anymore. And I feel it's more like an invitation to approach that work environment in a different way and to approach it more like a cooperative board game and see that everyone enjoys that game. And I feel there is this possibility.
Beautiful. It's this mic dropping moment. Thank you so much.
Well, you're really welcome. I really like being here. And even though I rambled on about some things, and there's probably so much more we could talk about, but
there's always another opportunity.
I hope so. I hope so. And what I really hope is that maybe you and other listeners will approach board games with a different view. So if you are already a fan of board games, I feel it's a good practice if you are a consultant or a facilitator, if you can look at board games more in the idea, what kind of experience does this board game want to create and how do I enhance that? And what kind of mechanics does it use in order to create that experience? I feel there's this vast inspirational set where you can draw ideas from. And I feel if you're like a consultant or you're like a system designer or an agile coach, or you are helping teams find their way, I feel it's really a good idea to look at board games because you're actually practicing looking through the veil, looking behind the first layer and the surface into the mechanics and what is actually making people do certain things. And then maybe you get a different idea. How do I change the work environment by changing certain rules? How do I change certain settings in order to create an experience I want to create? Because one thing is sure, one thing is I have to, if I have a bad set of rules, I can have the best crowd in the world. The game will not be fun. And so I cannot judge other people and be like, I need better players for this game to be fun. I need to make the game more fun.
Yeah. Thank you, Janek.
You're very, very welcome.
And if someone wants to hear more and reach out, I'll put your contact details in the show notes.
Yes, I would love that.
Wonderful. Dum, 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 dum. End of the podcast jingle. Wow. Jetzt muss ich nur den Knopf finden. Hier.